Right, good afternoon everyone, and many thanks for joining. Great to see so many people on the line. You're all very welcome. We're here today to talk about the power of organisational agility and to share some findings from a recent study that we've conducted here at Gate 1. So just by way of a welcome and introduction, my name is James Cooper. I'm a client director here at Gate 1, and I'm joined by my colleagues David Holliday and James Cumberland. And we're also extremely lucky to have two of our clients in the webinar, Mark and Amina. Both who are contributors to our research report, and later on they will be sharing some first-hand perspectives on our findings. In terms of agenda, after a brief introduction to Gate 1, David and myself will take you through some of the high-level findings from our research report. After that, we'll go into a Q&A session, initially with our client panel, and then opening it up to questions from the audience. So please do take advantage of the Q&A function within Zoom if you'd like to ask something to any of us, and we'll do our best to respond to as many as we can. And finally, we'll leave you with some resources for how to find out more, and aim to wrap up slightly early to leave you with at least a few minutes before your next meeting. So first, just to briefly touch on who we are as an organisation, Gate 1 are a specialist transformation consultancy, and we go to market in 4 key areas that you see on the left. So our services span the full life cycle of programme delivery, and they include operating model design and implementation, of which we will talk lots about today. And as you can see from the right, we work with organisations of all shapes and sizes across a wide range of sectors. And a sample of those client engagements that we've delivered that are relevant to today's topic is shown in the page on the right. And as a consultancy, we're driven by a simple idea, which is change that counts. And for our clients, that means working on their most critical and meaningful transformations. And we're really proud to be recognised for our good work, both by clients and externally in the market. So that's enough about us. Let's start now to delve into the findings from our research report, for which I'll initially pass to David to introduce.
Thanks, James, and good afternoon, everybody. So it's clear from our research and, just looking at the broader business environment these days that we're living in an increasingly complex and volatile world. And there's lots of different things driving that, but just consider for a moment the following examples. If we look at societal issues, that's things like sustainability, climate change, diversity and inclusion, inequality. These are all really real issues for businesses in a way that they weren't in the past. I mean, look at Boohoo recently lost half its market value for its supply chain issues. And that whole notion of ethical investors and consumers and the role that social media has to play is only going to get more increased in the future. There's lots and lots of literature on the exponential rise in data and technology, but we've really yet to see the impact of things like 5G, the Internet of Things, what AI can really do, and the proliferation of cloud computing. And for organizations to keep abreast of these types of changes and more, and then importantly extract the value from those and competitive advantage is an ongoing challenge. And Amina is going to talk a bit later, I think, about the exponential rise in customer expectations around speed, personalization, the need for a consistent service regardless of channel. Those are big challenges for businesses to adapt to. And we know that data, privacy, regulatory threats, those are all on the rise. And we've seen recently examples like British Airways that have had, record fine, 200 million euros through to their GDPR challenges. And, we live in this hyper-connected world right now. And of course, it's impacting organizations differently, but US-China trade wars, supply chain threats, oil price disputes, let's not forget Brexit right now and what's going on with the increased brinkmanship and whether we'll hit WTO arrangements come January, and I guess finally, COVID, we're in the thick of it. It's probably only entering its second chapter right now. And it's having already a very profound effect on many organizations and more to come. So, whilst there's always historically been volatility and complexity, we believe, and the surveys suggest, that there's never been more sustained rate of change and volatility than there is today. And that's set to continue going forward. So really, what does that mean for organizations and business leaders? Well, we think it's really tearing up the traditional rule book and approaches for how business leaders formulate and execute their strategy, think about what their operating models look like and evolve them, how they innovate and how they exceed and deliver a customer experience, and how they manage continual change. And all of this has come together, in our view, in this notion of organisational agility that really sits at the heart of how businesses can thrive in this new reality.
So earlier this year, we commissioned a piece of primary research, which was conducted by an independent agency who surveyed 300 senior decision makers at major UK companies. And as you can see from the graphic, we targeted generally larger companies, but across a range of sectors operating in both B2B and B2C markets. The respondents themselves trended towards senior C-suite and director level employees, with a decent spread across domains, including technology, operations, finance, marketing, and so on. And we asked them about their experiences of operating model transformations and the drivers, successes, and difficulties they've encountered along the way. We supplemented the results of this survey with a number of qualitative interviews with our clients, two of whom you'll hear from later. And our key finding is that organisational agility is critical for businesses seeking to navigate the increasingly complex and volatile environment that David has just described.
So let's start with just understanding what organisational agility really is. And we define this as the mindset, the capabilities and the systems that enable businesses to respond faster and more effectively than their competitors when it faced with this increasing disruption. So it's really about having this view and treating disruption more as an opportunity rather than a threat, and ultimately being able to adapt and thrive in ever-changing markets. And from our research, it really shows that there are substantial benefits when you get this right. 60% cited operational efficiency as a major benefit. And if you think about it, that's a constant reallocation and making best use of the company's scarce resources and budgets into those things that are most value adding and responding to the different market needs. 54% cited improving product development and innovation, as a key benefit here, and 47%, cited, improving market share. So these are really substantial benefits if you get this right. And we've brought together this in terms of an organising framework about how you build organisational agility in practice. And there's three broad areas that are just worth briefly touching on that make up the model. So the first is a connected operating model. So when we talk about operating models, we mean the sum total of talent, culture, the decision-making, processes, technology, customer experiences, the way that an organisation is internally put together. These are all fundamentally interconnected and are always in a state of flux. And we think that leaders should be regularly assessing, challenging and adapting their operating models in the face of this disruption to achieve new higher levels of performance. The adaptive strategy is an interesting one, and what's happening in the world is a lot of traditional strategy is quite sporadic, it can be quite cumbersome, and the outputs can quickly be outdated. I mean, if you consider yourself the experiences of strategy in the past, how many strategy documents have just gathered dust? How many annual strategy planning exercises are merely a financial exercise with no intrinsic value? We think that organizations still need to have that long-term sense of purpose and their sources of differentiation, and that becoming a guiding framework. But within this is a much more decentralized adaptive strategy approach, which empowers local teams, allows them to respond to their environment, make quicker decisions on the strategic priorities and innovation, and by doing so, be able to pivot quicker and faster to deliver results. And finally, it's all great to think about having a connected op model mindset and having this adaptive strategy, but it doesn't mean anything if you can't deliver results. And we know that transforming a business is a long and a hard journey, and with change as a new normal, it can be exhausting. So really meaningful transformation is about being able to take the decisive actions backed by insights where you have them, having the right transformational intensity, that is to say, investing in the right resources, having the right mindset and the right capabilities, and about thinking about how people actually change in practice, when faced with complex change that's often messy and unpredictable. So I'll hand back over to James to really talk through, what came through in the survey findings.
Yeah, thanks. So let's just dig into each of those concepts in a bit more detail. And what became clear as this survey unfolded is that this concept of operating model transformation is very real and very much front of mind for business leaders. Indeed, some 87% of senior executives we polled have been involved in transforming their organisation's operating model in just the last 3 years, and nearly 3/4 have a project in train at time of survey. So leaders are taking this on as a critical strategy and having to adapt in the face of that volatility. But why is this type of transformation so popular and delivered with such regularity? Well, 57% cited greater organisational agility to respond to market conditions as the key driver. And as we've already learned, organisational agility allows a business's operating model to adapt rapidly, repeatedly, and effectively, even in a disruptive market. There are, of course, barriers to achieving this, and they can be significant. And the concept of sacred cows is one of these barriers. Sacred cows are the practices and beliefs that are held to be above criticism and deemed out of scope for change. They could include pet projects, rigid budgets, or outdated perspectives held by a few. And a silo mentality was the #1 barrier to transformation in our survey. And this is another classic barrier to organisational agility, particularly in older, larger companies which may have grown inorganically over the years. So it's true to say that silos and sacred cows exist in every business, but a really effective operating model transformation gives leaders the license and opportunity to put everything on the table in order to genuinely challenge and reinvent their organisation. So what then is the significance of the connected part of the connected op model? Well, part of our core philosophy is that all elements of the operating model, which include the talent, processes, technology, customer experience, and so on, are all interconnected and in a state of constant flux. And the connected nature of operating models means it's necessary to think and design holistically by keeping a balanced focus across all of the critical areas and not letting anything be unintentionally overlooked. We often liken it to a Rubik's Cube. If you only focus on aligning the colours on a single surface, you quickly find the other sides are in a state of disarray. And however well planned your programme is, it is inevitable that at some point scope and requirements will change, as a large proportion of our survey respondents indicated. And therefore, having the confidence to design quickly and implement the changes iteratively is critical. We say, don't become obsessed with overly polishing the design without testing it in practice, because beautiful operating models fail. And to support this approach, a good strategy is to cultivate a culture of curiosity at all levels of the business. And plenty of external studies outside of our research show that when curiosity is triggered, there's a greater likelihood of thinking more deeply and rationally about decisions and coming up with more creative solutions. So to summarise, responding to the ever-evolving needs of the market requires leaders regularly to review, challenge and reset their operating models, but to do so in a connected way.
So with adaptive strategy, we talked about traditional strategy can be sporadic, it can be cumbersome, the outputs quickly become outdated and disconnected to the real world reality. So what does adaptive strategy really involve in practice? Well, successful organisations have this guiding framework, this clear sense of their purpose, their culture, their differentiation. But within this, they're really decentralising a lot of the formulation and execution of strategy. So it's moving away from the boardroom and closer towards local leadership teams and the front line. And this empowers those teams to respond to their environment and then to prioritise new opportunities. And it's also about making sure that strategy to execution happens in much tighter cycles that also is bringing in a lot more innovation. You know, when we looked at this in our survey, it was really interesting to see the relevance of customer experience and how this really drives an adaptive strategy. And we know that a heightened customer expectation is becoming a defining factor of modern businesses. So as a result, it's interesting to see, you know, what the research talked about, which is there's a large gap between, you know, customer experience. There's a mismatch between how organizations view the importance of customer experience versus their ability to achieve it. You know, in our survey, 62% of respondents say customer experience is at the heart of their organization, yet a similar amount, 64%, don't believe they can exceed those customer experience expectations. So that's really significant because what it suggests is that those organizations are really at risk of being outpaced by new players who can succeed in raising customer experience levels and come into the market. And it's probably no surprise in our survey findings that, changing customer experiences and the need to meet future customer experience is one of the top issues that are keeping executives awake at night. Now, I guess it's quite opportune right now to look at COVID and how adaptive strategy has really come to the fore during this current environment for all sorts of organizations. And I think, like myself, if you've seen locally some of the restaurants that you've seen, how they've evolved to home delivery or online retail or subscription services, it's a local example of being able to adapt and pivot. And we've seen with other organizations, Spotify, for example, found that COVID has drastically reduced their advertising revenues associated with their free user model. So what they've had to do is pivot into exclusive, more higher margin content and podcasts endorsed by celebrity deals, so more of a Netflix type model. And even very large incumbents like Unilever have pivoted during the crisis, as demand soared for things like packaged food, surface cleaners, personal hygiene products. They pivoted more into the production and marketing of those types of products at the expense of certain things that aren't selling so well these days, such as skincare. And, I think every organization is finding this move to mass home working to be a challenge that's fundamentally impacting their strategy. And many organizations now figuring out how to virtualize their products and services to meet this challenge.
So transformation is hard. Transforming a business is a daunting task, and meaningful transformation can be a long, hard journey. The potential rewards are high, but so too are the risks to both the organisation and the reputation of the individuals leading the change. In our experience, successful organisations have the mindset to commit with intensity and focus and are prepared to make the tough decisions and have a laser-like focus on results and outcomes. And the best leaders back their transformations with the right resources and talent to see the changes through. Most organisations are supplementing their internal capability with external resources. In fact, 3/4 of respondents did not believe they had all of the internal skills and resources they needed to deliver transformation. And when we dug into this execution capability gap and looked through the lens of scale of firm, we found similar results at all sizes. What was notable, however, was the tendency with which particularly larger firms are investing heavily in their change expertise through supplementary external capability. These larger players are increasingly finding that creating an ecosystem of transformation partners is essential. And by investing in their own transformation capability, while seeking external partners and specialists to enhance and turbocharge their most complex transformations, more meaningful transformation can be achieved. And in terms of change, well, it's basic human nature to seek certainty and to resist change, and organisations are no different. 41% of our survey respondents indicated that stakeholder resistance is one of the top transformation barriers to overcome. And in an increasingly complex and volatile world, the people-related aspects of change are critical, but quite often messy and unpredictable. And our experience tells us that traditional linear change approaches, limited communication, limited training, limited comms, are not effective and undermine the entire transformation. We would always advocate a flexible, agile approach to change that takes employees and other stakeholders on the journey and might include features such as a highly collaborative approach to solution design that involves engaging employees and even customers, and launching changes through frequent and incremental releases so they're easier to implement and allows you to nudge users towards new behaviours. Finally, and in a nice wraparound back to the start, we asked executives what are their most important areas to focus on when transforming their organisations. And the graphic on the bottom right shows the top 4 areas are products and services, technology, customers and channels, and information and data. And whilst they may chime with you, what I find most interesting is that every element scores reasonably highly, reinforcing our opening concept that a connected op model is at the heart of successful transformation. I'll now hand to my colleague James to introduce our guest panellists.
Thank you, James, and thank you, David, for taking us through that. So yes, I will just introduce our panellists in a second, but just to reiterate, if you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A function within Zoom. And when we get to sort of the open Q&A section, I'll do my best to pass them around our panelists. So as you heard earlier, at Gate One, we've been privileged to work with clients across both the public and private sector in supporting in their transformation of their operating models. And as we've said today, we're really pleased to have two clients who've embarked on their own transformation of their operating models in the past. Firstly, we have Mark Skinner, who's the UK HR Director at William Hill. We worked with Mark last year on a technology transformation programme with a strong focus on agile culture change. And we also have Amina Graham, who's a non-exec member at Network Homes. And we've worked with Amina on several customer experience improvement programmes in the past. So Mark, if I could come to you first, could you just give us a brief sort of explanation of your current role and background?
Yeah, thank you, James. And thank you for having me here. It's great to be able to talk to you. Organisational agility is not only something that I find fascinating, I think it's also so topical right now, as David was saying, in a volatile and especially in a COVID world. So a little bit about me. I'm the UK HR Director at William Hill, as you heard. That includes our digital business as well as retail, which I think we are most well known for, but also our product and technology teams as well. I've been at William Hill for 4.5 years. I moved here from financial services. Some people always look at me or say that that's a strange move, but for me, I was attracted very much to William Hill for the transformation opportunity, and I've never looked back.
Great, thanks, Mark. So as you know, a large number of our respondents to the survey said that greater organisational agility to respond to market conditions was a key driver of operating model transformation. So it'd be great just to hear, your perspective on this and how this has been important in the work you've done.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I think there are a number of elements that can drive operating model transformation. I think market conditions is a key one, but I think also cost reduction or business growth are two others. For us in William Hill, we've faced increased regulation in the UK, and that has encouraged us to look at different markets. For example, that led us to buy the Mr. Green brand, which has much more of a European presence. It was also a happy coincidence that in the US, the federal law prohibiting gambling was repealed, which meant that state by state, they can open up gambling through sports books or online gambling. And as you can imagine, there is a big prize there for any organisation that can respond to that market quickly. We didn't have time to stop, think and plan. We had to build a platform, recruit new colleagues, find new office space. And that really forced agility upon us. And if I may, I'll give another example as well. I mean, we repeatedly had challenges in finding the development resources we needed in the UK because of that talent, that war for talent and all of the competition looking for those types of roles. We challenged ourselves to look further afield, which led us to buying a development hub in Poland, where talent was much easier to attract. Saying all of that quickly makes it sound easy, and it was far from it. To make these changes, we had to create the right culture and have a really strong leadership.
Great, thank you, Mark. Amina, if I could come to you, and again, if I could just ask you for a sort of a brief explanation of your current role and background.
Yes, thank you, James, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm currently a non-executive of Network Homes, which is a London-based housing association, and I've spent the last 12 years in the housing sector. I've been lucky enough to work at the forefront of innovation and improving the customer experience by delivering better, faster, lower cost services in a sector where customers have traditionally very limited choice, convenience and control. And like most sectors, I think digitalisation was a real game changer and enabled a step change in service delivery and also a better customer experience, which led to improved efficiency and for the sector has enabled the organisations I've worked for to create more capacity to build more much needed affordable homes. Prior to working in the housing sector at both RHP and L&Q, I worked at Marks and Spencer's for over 20 years. And there, most notably, I led the transformation of the non-food business operating model at a time when there was a real threat of takeover by Philip Green. So we had a real burning platform and had to move quickly. And I think with the changes we made, we were able to fend off the threat of takeover, but increase our sales, profitability and share price. So an interesting career spanning both public and private sectors.
Brilliant, thanks Amina. And again, just taking something from the report, it states that 62% of respondents say that customer experience is at the heart of their organisation. Clearly, it's been an important part of your career, so it'd be great just to hear, your perspectives on that and the work that you've been a part of.
Yes, definitely. And I think, as you said earlier, James, COVID has led to many businesses revisiting their purposes and their reason to exist. And I think to be successful and sustainable is all about delivering a great customer experience, and the ability to adapt and iterate quickly to remain relevant is increasingly important for survival. And I think, as you said, in the fast changing world where customers are spoilt for choice and they judge their experience across all sectors, not just the sector they're accessing services from, the need to differentiate and build trust and advocacy is really, really important. And I do think our role as leaders is to dream big, but to be able to deliver it pragmatically. And to do that, I think you need to learn from the best, and the best across all sectors. Again, who's doing interesting things for customers? What are your customers experiencing when they're leading their lives outside of your organisation? And be really brave in trying new things, but also the importance of data and black box thinking, so you codify your learning as you continue to iterate with greater agility and pace. And I think by putting customers at the heart of what you do, you get to appreciate what are their pain points and how can you increase their convenience and advocacy by solving those pain points quickly. And I think when you're thinking about the customer experience, thinking about effort and making it as effortless for them as possible, and also how you create fans and create that advocacy for the brand by being consistent across all channels. And I think in both of the sectors I've worked in, our people have had to act their way into a new way of thinking rather than think their way into a new way of acting. And that's where agility and iterating becomes really important and really powerful, because as people act in different ways, they learn new skills, they get the results of those, and that gives them the confidence to keep iterating. And that certainly has been the case at both L&Q, RHP and Marks and Spencer. And I think your point about putting effort into embedding the change is so critically important. Many people think of the transformation as the act of transforming, but it's how it works down at front level employees, which is the real test, and getting them to buy in and feel empowered, and actually taking the decision making down to the lowest point possible in the organisation if you want to create that speed and that efficiency. And I think you talked a lot about curiosity, and my experience has been actually you have to ramp up innovation because the world is fast and ever changing, and technology is changing exponentially. So unless you keep iterating and going, you can find yourself having to start again, and it's much harder to start again and more expensive to do so than it is to keep iterating and keep thinking about new ways of working. And so I've tried really hard in all my roles to really cultivate that curiosity and sense of we can try new things, we can be brave, and it's okay to fail, providing we learn from those failings as we move on and try and do things that really do put the customer at the heart of what we do.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Amina. Coming back to you, Mark, if that's okay. You spoke about the importance of leaders understanding the culture around agility and that change is constant. But in your experience, how do you practically promote a culture of innovation and risk-taking in the workplace?
And I think that's it's a great question, and I think it's widely accepted that cultural change isn't easy. For us, I guess we went back to basics. How would we explain to our colleagues that we needed to do things differently? We actually, and it sounds very simple, but we said to our colleagues that we wanted to have a culture of continuous improvement. And you might think that that sounds obvious, but by saying that, we created a permission culture. We spoke about the fact that change was the new normal for us. And that very much signposted that things needed to be different and change was going to be all around us. When you do that, it's quite interesting because I think that people do self-select. They decide whether or not that is for them or it isn't. And that sounds quite harsh. And obviously we help people on that journey, but I think it's just so important to be clear, open and honest. There were also some symbolic acts, as I would call them. We offered people the opportunity from the UK to go and help set up our US digital business that I spoke about. That showed how important it was to us and how important their skills were also. And obviously for some people that, provided them with a brilliant lifestyle opportunity as well. And I think it was David talking about pivoting, and we very much had to pivot on our priorities. We tried things, and when it didn't work, we said why it didn't work, and we tried something new. And that, in my opinion, takes a lot of bravery, especially from a business that has been quite predictable and dependable over a number of years. But the biggest reminder for me is all about co-creation. And it was something that Amina was saying, it is if you have the luxury of time to co-create outcomes with your colleagues, then there's no substitution for grassroots innovation and engagement. That's every time involve people in the journey.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. And again, so just coming back to you, Amina, you say in the report that to create a service-led business means knowing your customers, using data intelligently, and making decisions at the nearest point to the customer as possible. But again, in your experience, does customer experience actually lead to improved commercial outcomes?
I would say overwhelmingly yes. And I think going back to my experience in the housing sector, in the summer budget of 2015, rent reductions were announced, which caught the whole of the sector by surprise. And that led many traditional organisations to either or do both things of cutting their costs through redundancies and cutting their rate of development in new homes. And I think at the time we challenged ourselves to say, obviously the government sees the sector as being fat, and therefore we have to change that perception, and we need to change it by thinking differently. So for us, it wasn't about making redundancies or not developing homes. It was about how do we deliver the services our customers truly want in a better, faster and a lower cost way. And that led us to think about the whole way we were structured and how we could make things simpler, how we could focus on core service delivery, how we could test that out with our stakeholders. And actually, as a result of that, we were able to deliver a new operating model, which was much simpler. We had 15 specialised teams that we merged down into 6 more multifunctional teams and more skilled teams. We shifted customers from mainly a phone or physical face-to-face presence to a digital service by talking to them about the benefits for them, not the benefits for us. And that was really important, and getting them hooked. And I think when we designed digital services, I used to talk very much about the goldfish effect. And if customers couldn't have accessed or have done what they wanted within 7 seconds, then the service simply wasn't good enough, coming back to the effort again. So by doing all of those things, we were able to really simplify our operating model, we were able to reduce our operating costs and we were able to improve our customer satisfaction because we are available anytime, any place and on any device. Whereas previously the service offer tended to be 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. And we were able to create real capacity to build more homes, more affordable homes more quickly. And so I think that has played out at both L&Q and RHP and enabled a different way of thinking, which comes back to data in some ways and making sure we've got the right data, we know the pain points and we prioritise what action we take and when. And certainly, as you say, a big barrier can sometimes be stakeholders. So having to explain and being able to rationalise, by improving the service, we improve our efficiency because we're simplifying our operations, as being a big part of getting that engagement at board level and for them to take that leap of faith into a different service model and working in a different way, where we've used agile methodology to do show and tells. And that's not only been good for our people to build confidence, but also our board, so they can see that we can iterate and change as we go rather than wait till big bang and it's not quite right. And Marks and Spencer's, when we put the customer at the heart of what we did, and we changed the way we bought products, we were able to ethically source, we could really speed up our procurement, and we could get good services and products to market more quickly. We improved our profitability, we increased our share price. So I absolutely think customer service is at the heart of efficiency, and doing one well leads to efficiency, but you should always start with the customer rather than start with reducing costs as the mindset. How do I make my service better? And I think that will lead to it being faster, and in turn that will lead to it being lower cost. And I think the downfall most organisations take is they start with the lower cost, and that leads them into different things about really getting to the heart of what customers want.
Great, thanks Amina, and thanks Mark. We're going to move now into a slightly more open Q&A format. So again, please do use the Q&A functionality. We've had some come through already. So as I say, I'll try and sort of pass them out to the panelists as best as possible. So maybe if I could come to you first, James. We've got a question here. Given the frequency of transformation initiatives, 80+% of surveys said that they'd gone through transformation in the last 3 years. The question is, how do you advise you can best manage change fatigue across an organisation?
I think it's a great question, and sort of reflecting that this term target operating model is almost a tautology. If an operating model is by its nature constantly evolving, then sort of can you ever reach your target? And we've sort of kicked around whether something like adaptive operating model is actually a better title. So I totally understand the challenge. For me, the solution to that is about initially setting a North Star, something that the whole organisation is sort of aiming for and galvanised behind. And then inevitably, as you get into planning, you're going to have some shorter and longer term initiatives. And I think setting expectations about the pace and scale of change is really critical. I personally always like to start with a firework, something that is, symbolic and demonstrates some real value early on. And that's sort of in terms of getting the trade moving, building some excitement and building momentum. And often programs flounder if there's not that kind of that buzz and excitement at the start. But ultimately, there's always going to be some longer term initiatives. And we sometimes use the blast radius technique to think about stakeholder engagement, which is a technique hailing from lean change methodology. And it just allows you to consider which stakeholder groups are most impacted by the change at any one time. And you'd expect different stakeholder groups to come in and out of that as any given program progresses. So an example of that was where we were working with a client, a global client, to reduce the cost and effort associated with their low value transactions in their back office. And part of that solution was putting in a second shared service centre in the Asia Pac region. But clearly that was always going to be a kind of 6 to 18 month project. And so there was a separate stream of work, which was about creating a shared pool of specialist resources that could work on a sort of ticket item based approach, offer 24/7 service, create lower cost, but create more meaningful career paths for some of the more junior employees. And we ran those two pieces, those two projects sort of in parallel, but at very different cadence and focus to ensure that it wasn't a one size fits all.
Great, thank you, James. Again, another one, maybe I'll come to you, David, for this. Clearly you spoke about sort of the rise of technology and data earlier, but where do you see technology fitting into this model?
So technology and data, I think is, we've already talked about how it's exponential, it's changing so fast and businesses can't afford to stand still. So it's really integral to the whole approach to organizational agility. And I think, Mina mentioned earlier, that ability to, as an organization, look outwards into the market in your industry, in what other companies and sectors are doing, and constantly scanning the market and having that curiosity is really important. And that shouldn't just be the preserve of the IT function to do that. But there's one thing having a look at, what's out there. There's another thing about having the right processes, mindset and framework to test those solutions, bring them into the organization, make sense of them for your business, and then ultimately test those things and integrate them to deliver actually the value and the competitive advantage of those things. And, that's a constant challenge, particularly as the choices are bewildering for a lot of business leaders. It's no surprise from the survey results that when you look at, and we ask respondents, where are the biggest areas of their operating model that they are constantly seeking to evolve? I think it was 60%, see technology, and 57%, which are two of the highest ones, as some of the biggest priorities. So, that's only here to stay. And we know that many technologies are really only in the hype cycle. They've barely landed, like 5G, really getting to grips with what AI means, really using cloud, to its full potential, and many more that, there's not time on this webinar to talk about. So in summary, technology is really at the core of organizational agility, and it isn't just IT that need to be looking at this.
Thank you, Dave. So maybe a couple more just coming in. Amina, you spoke about it earlier, and maybe just could expand on it. How do I convince my skeptical management team of the benefits of this type of approach?
I think by keeping it real is incredibly important, and having some tangible deliveries and outcomes that really resonate with the audience. And I think, as I said, I always start with, how do we make it better for customers and colleagues? In making it better, how can we speed it up? Obviously enabled mostly through technology. And then what will that lead to? Lower cost or repeat business, and probably both. And so I always try and keep it really simple and talk in those terms. This is how it's going to be better. This is how it's going to be faster. This is how it's going to deliver value by either decreasing costs or improving sales, and mostly the two of them. And I think when you talk in real terms to people, they get it. I think the danger sometimes is making it too theoretical. And as I said, I think we all have to be able to deliver more pragmatically, and definitely for board members. And for board members, and being one now, you are always thinking about your limited resources and am I using them in the best way? And so you have to create the case for change and keep repeating it often, and take them on the journey and remind them where you've got to and where you're going to, which is incredibly important, I think, as part of stakeholder engagement, and also being honest about what's not worked or what's not quite where you want it to be and how you're going to rectify it. And I think there's more honesty required now than ever if we're going to remain relevant and be sustainable businesses.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Amina. Okay, just taking a look. Okay, maybe come to you, Mark. So clearly, we've spoken about adaptive strategy in the model, but really to you, what does adaptive strategy look like in practice?
So I think it's kind of building on what I was saying before, really around kind of fail fast. I think that, and I will just pick up on something that James Cooper was talking about in terms of that kind of North Star. So I think it's really important from a colleague perspective that you do, and actually this also applies to the board that Amina was speaking to. You know, you set your vision, your North Star, and as long as that vision or that North Star is kind of 3 years out, anything that you do between now and that point, you can very easily communicate the reason why you're doing it. You can always come back to that pillar and say, look, this is what we're heading for, and now this is why we need to change. So adaptive strategy for me is just being able to pivot, change your priorities, fail fast, talk to people about it, say that and I've got a brilliant example actually, is when we tried to roll out Agile in technology. It probably took us 3 attempts. You know, the first attempt at doing that, I think we did very much kind of top down, and we talked to our colleagues about, you know, this is what's going to happen, and almost tried to enforce a change. But by the third attempt, it was very much around kind of actually, how do we help people to understand that this is the right way of doing it? So kind of almost got the team to see that and grow it themselves. And that goes back, I guess, to that co-creation point. You get so much more traction if people are bought into it. It sounds really simple, but all too often, I think you see in businesses that, you know, senior teams make a decision about the way we're going to go and then try to enforce that change, but it doesn't always stick. So adaptive, fail fast, feel comfortable with the uncomfortable, and above all, resilience. So
brilliant. Thank you. You've actually, I'm going to come to you again, Mark. You've actually been called out specifically in the Q&A. So I've got one here for you. What are the signs which made you think William Hill had to go through a cultural transformation as well as a more process tech-driven transformation?
Yeah, and I get asked that question quite a lot, because I guess when people think of William Hill, they do think of the high street bookie. And it's because, you know, we are the #1 kind of recognized brand on the high street as being a bookmaker. So when I joined, you know, my first interview I was very much had that in mind. What excited me and what I could see was that actually, if you could take that high street presence into an online digital environment, then we had a massive opportunity to actually get ahead of some of the competition that were doing that really well. I also joined at a time when we had, on our app, we'd released a new version. It was a really, really poor customer experience. So we'd lost market share. The year I joined, we also then had to do a profit warning. So you imagine all of these things together have kind of forced us to take a very hard look at ourselves and say, right, how do we get back to being #1? I think that answers the question. It's more around the fact that, you know, and I loved what Amina was saying about customer, because I think that was one of the leaps that certainly we've made in the last couple of years, is especially when it comes to an app. You know, we can make a change on our app in the morning and you see the results in the afternoon. You know immediately whether or not that's working. And that's so exciting. It creates a very fast-paced, sometimes chaotic environment, but it's just, you know, the adrenaline of knowing that you're getting stuff right and you're seeing the numbers go up is just brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for taking two on the bounce there. I think we've got time for one more, so maybe I'll go to James here. Really, it's sort of been great to hear about this, but how would anyone sort of start on this process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, you know, we've had to adapt our core methodology in the post-COVID world, recognizing that there's a greater level of uncertainty for ourselves and our clients, and also that some of our clients are reluctant to commit to the sort of more traditional, bigger, longer programs that we might have delivered in the past. So we've adapted our methods. We've been fortunate enough to have deployed our rapid diagnostic methodology at a number of clients since lockdown. And we use techniques like virtual accelerator events, online collaboration tools, to sort of effectively do what we always do, which is to get to a set of strategic choices about what the future looks like for your business. So just practically speaking, getting started is really about taking this model and applying it, thinking through each of the elements, holding a lens up to your organisation and understanding what it is that you need to be focused on going forward to back to the point, get to your North Star.
Great. Thank you, James. Thanks everyone for your questions. Obviously a huge thanks to Mark and Amina again for fielding those questions and giving us some perspectives on the report. I'll now hand over to David just for some conclusions.
Right, thanks, James. So just in summary, I think we've covered an awful lot of ground today. At quite a high level. It's been great to hear from Mark and Amina to bring some of that to life with some of their real life experiences on the ground. I'll sort of leave you with three main kind of points to consider here. The first is this notion of increased volatility and complexity is different from the past, and it's here to stay, and it's going to probably stay the same or get even more in the future. So it's a new reality that many, many businesses are finding themselves in. And I think from our survey, through the things like customer experience gap and some of the other struggles, many organizations are finding it a struggle to keep up with that change as the new normal. So, the rule book on how you deliver and execute your strategy and exceed customer experience needs to change as well. And, we believe that, following this model of organizational agility and putting in place a number of the practices around here and the culture that goes with it is going to help many organizations thrive in the future. So those are the kind of the key takeaways from the survey.
Super. Well, thank you everyone for attending, listening, and for your contributions today. I think we've got to most of your questions, and clearly there's plenty more that we could follow up with. So for people on this call, we'll follow up with copies of the slides and a recording of this webinar and sort of copies of the questions. In terms of more broadly further information, our website, which you can see the link there, has got a number of points of view, case studies and insights which are freely available. The accompanying report upon much of what this webinar is based upon is available too. So for those on the webinar, we'll send you a link to download this, an electronic copy, and please do let us know if there's anyone else in your network that you'd like us to send the link to. And finally, I suppose, do feel free to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's a question, an observation, or just to kick a problem around. Our email address is at the bottom of the page, so please do reach out. And otherwise, on behalf of myself and the panel, thank you again and have a lovely day.